Captain Marcus Blackwood had served the royal family of Valdoria for 15 years. His loyalty was unquestioned, his record spotless. Standing at 6 feet tall with graying temples, he commanded respect from every guard in the palace. That cold October morning started like any other, with Marcus conducting his routine security briefing in the east wing of the Grand Palace. The morning sun filtered through the massive stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the marble floors. Marcus reviewed the day's schedule with his team of 12 guards. King Alexander was scheduled for a private meeting with various court officials, including his wife, Queen Isabella. The Queen had requested a private audience, which wasn't unusual, but something in her tone during the scheduling had made Marcus take notice. As the guards dispersed to their positions, Marcus felt an odd sensation in his stomach. His instincts, honed by years of protecting the royal family, were telling him something was different today. Queen Isabella had been acting strangely for the past few weeks. She seemed distant, often whispering with unfamiliar visitors who claimed to be distant relatives from her homeland. Marcus positioned himself outside the king's private study, a room lined with ancient books and family portraits. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar, allowing him to hear voices inside. King Alexander's deep, warm voice mixed with Queen Isabella's softer tones. Initially, their conversation seemed normal, discussing upcoming state visits and charitable events. However, as Marcus listened more carefully, he noticed the Queen's voice becoming more insistent, almost urgent. She was asking about the king's will, about succession plans, about what would happen if something unexpected occurred. The king laughed gently, assuring her that such conversations could wait for many years. But Isabella pressed on, her questions becoming more specific and concerning. Marcus shifted his position slightly, trying to get a better sense of what was happening inside. Through the crack in the door, he could see Queen Isabella moving around the room, her hands gesturing animatedly. She seemed to be building up to something important, something that was making the king increasingly uncomfortable. The conversation took a darker turn when Isabella mentioned certain court members who believed the kingdom needed fresh leadership and new direction. King Alexander's voice became stern, asking his wife what she meant by such statements. Marcus felt his hand instinctively move toward his sword handle, though he wasn't sure why. Suddenly, Queen Isabella's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but Marcus could still make out her words. She spoke of opportunities, of chances that might not come again, of people who were counting on her to act decisively. The king's responses became shorter, more concerned. Marcus realized he was witnessing something that would change everything he thought he knew about the royal family he had sworn to protect. Marcus watched through the narrow opening as Queen Isabella reached into her ornate jewelry box, pulling out what appeared to be a small vial filled with clear liquid. His blood ran cold as he recognized the container from his training in identifying potential threats. The crystal vial was the type commonly used by assassins to store odorless, tasteless poisons that could be easily mixed into food or drink. King Alexander was turned away, examining a document at his desk, completely unaware of what his wife was doing behind him. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she uncorked the vial, moving toward the silver tea service that had been prepared for their morning meeting. The delicate china cup sat innocently on the tray, steam still rising from the fresh pot of the king's favorite Earl Grey tea. Marcus felt his heart pounding so loudly, he was certain everyone in the palace could hear it. His mind raced through his options. If he burst through the door immediately, he might be wrong about what he was seeing. Perhaps the vial contained medicine or some kind of supplement. But if he was right and he hesitated, King Alexander would be dead within minutes. The Queen's movements became more deliberate as she approached the tea service. She glanced over her shoulder to ensure the king was still occupied with his papers. Marcus could see the calculation in her eyes, the cold determination that seemed so different from the warm, caring woman he had known for years. This was not the Queen Isabella who visited orphanages and comforted grieving families during state funerals. As Isabella raised the vial above the king's teacup, Marcus made his decision. He couldn't risk being wrong about something this serious. Every fiber of his being as a royal guard screamed at him to protect his king, regardless of the consequences. He took a deep breath and prepared to act, knowing that his next move would either save a life or destroy his career. But just as Marcus was about to push through the door, Queen Isabella paused. She seemed to hear something that made her freeze in place, the vial still hovering over the teacup. King Alexander was rising from his chair, about to turn around. Isabella quickly pulled her hand back, hiding the vial in the folds of her dress, but not before a single drop of the clear liquid fell into the tea. The king turned with a warm smile, completely unaware of what had just transpired. He moved toward the tea service, commenting on how wonderful the morning smelled, and how much he was looking forward to their conversation. Isabella forced a smile onto her face, but Marcus could see the panic in her eyes as she realized she couldn't stop what was about to happen. King Alexander reached for his teacup, the one with the single drop of poison now mixed invisibly with his Earl Grey tea. Marcus knew he had perhaps seconds to act before his king took a sip that could kill him. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a stone. Everything he had sworn to protect was about to be destroyed by the person who should have been the king's greatest ally. Isabella watched her husband with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Was it regret, fear? Or was she simply calculating how long it would take for the poison to work? The king raised the cup toward his lips, steam curling upward in the morning sunlight, completely trusting and unaware that his life hung in the balance. Marcus burst through the door with such force that it slammed against the wall, causing both the king and queen to jump in surprise. Without hesitation, he lunged forward and knocked the teacup from King Alexander's hands just as it touched his lips. The fine china shattered against the marble floor, sending tea and fragments flying across the room. King Alexander stared at his loyal guard in complete shock, tea dripping from his beard. Queen Isabella's face went completely white, her hands shaking as she clutched the hidden vial in her dress. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of tea still dripping from the ornate table onto the floor. Marcus stood breathing heavily, knowing he had just committed an act that could be seen as an assault on the king himself. But he also knew he had likely saved Alexander's life. His eyes moved between the shocked king and the terrified queen, trying to find the right words to explain what he had witnessed. King Alexander was the first to speak, his voice a mixture of confusion and authority. He demanded to know why his most trusted guard had just attacked him in his own study. Marcus looked directly at Queen Isabella, watching as she tried to compose herself and hide the evidence of what she had done. The queen quickly stepped forward, her voice shaking as she attempted to take control of the situation. She suggested that Marcus had clearly suffered some kind of mental breakdown, that the stress of his position had finally gotten to him. She recommended that he be removed from duty immediately and examined by the royal physicians. But Marcus knew he couldn't let her manipulate the situation. He pointed directly at Queen Isabella and told King Alexander exactly what he had witnessed. He described the vial, the poison being added to the tea, and the queen's suspicious behavior over the past several weeks. His words hung in the air like accusations that couldn't be taken back. King Alexander looked between his wife and his guard, clearly struggling to process what he was hearing. The idea that his beloved wife, the mother of his children, could attempt to poison him seemed impossible to believe. Yet Marcus had never lied to him, had never given him any reason to doubt his loyalty or his judgment. Queen Isabella's composure began to crack under the pressure. She denied everything, claiming that Marcus was clearly delusional and dangerous. She insisted that she had only been preparing tea for her husband, as she had done countless times before, but her voice wavered, and she unconsciously stepped away from both men. The king's trained eye began to notice details he had missed before: his wife's pale complexion, her trembling hands, the way she seemed to be hiding something in her dress. Years of ruling had taught him to read people, to sense when someone wasn't telling the truth. The evidence was circumstantial, but the behavior was undeniable. Marcus maintained his position between the king and queen, ready to protect Alexander from any further attempts. He suggested that the queen be searched, that the contents of her jewelry box be examined, and that the spilled tea be tested by the royal chemists. If he was wrong, he would accept whatever punishment the king deemed appropriate. The tension in the room was unbearable, as King Alexander made his decision about whom to trust. His 15-year relationship with Marcus weighed against his marriage to Isabella and the implications of what such an accusation could mean for the kingdom. The choice he made in the next few moments would determine not only the fate of his guard and his wife, but potentially the future of the entire royal line. King Alexander's voice was steady but cold as he addressed his wife directly. He asked her to show him what she was hiding in her dress to prove Marcus wrong and end this terrible accusation. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, each second feeling like an eternity. Queen Isabella's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for escape. She continued to deny having anything hidden, but her body language told a different story. Her free hand clutched nervously at her dress while the other remained suspiciously still at her side. Sweat began to form on her forehead despite the cool morning air. The king stepped closer to his wife, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. He had ruled for 20 years, survived assassination attempts, political coups, and foreign invasions. He knew the look of guilt when he saw it, and he was seeing it now in the woman he had loved and trusted above all others. Marcus remained alert, watching both the king and queen carefully. He noticed that Isabella kept glancing toward the window, as if considering whether she could escape. But they were 3 stories up, and the only exit was blocked by Marcus himself. She was trapped, and everyone in the room knew it. Finally, King Alexander made his decision. In a voice that carried all the authority of his crown, he commanded his wife to reveal what she was hiding, or face the consequences of defying a direct royal order. The weight of his words seemed to break something inside Queen Isabella, and her carefully maintained facade began to crumble. With tears streaming down her face, Isabella slowly reached into her dress and pulled out the crystal vial. The clear liquid inside caught the morning light, looking innocent enough but carrying the potential for death. She held it out with shaking hands, unable to meet her husband's eyes as the full reality of her actions became undeniable. King Alexander stared at the vial in horror, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. The woman he had shared his bed with, who had borne his children, who had stood beside him through every triumph and tragedy of his reign, had just tried to murder him. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating that he struggled to remain standing. Marcus stepped forward and carefully took the vial from the queen's trembling hands, treating it as the deadly weapon it was. He would ensure it was properly tested and documented as evidence. But even without testing, everyone in the room knew what it contained and what it had been intended to do. The queen collapsed into a chair, her strength finally giving out under the weight of her guilt and fear. Through her tears, she began to speak, but her words came out in broken fragments. She mentioned pressure from others, threats against her family back home, promises of power and protection if she acted as they wished. King Alexander listened to his wife's confession with growing understanding and rage. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was part of a larger conspiracy involving foreign agents and domestic traitors. Isabella hadn't acted alone. She had been manipulated and coerced by people who wanted to destabilize the kingdom. As the full scope of the plot began to emerge, Marcus realized that stopping the poisoning was only the beginning. There were other conspirators still at large, other threats that needed to be identified and neutralized. The kingdom was under attack from within, and Queen Isabella was just one piece of a much larger and more dangerous puzzle. The king's initial shock was transforming into the cold calculation of a ruler who had just discovered that his enemies had penetrated the very heart of his family. The morning that had started so peacefully was becoming the beginning of a fight for the survival of everything he had worked to build and protect. Through her sobs, Queen Isabella revealed the shocking truth behind her actions. She spoke of Lord Dmitri Volkov, a charismatic nobleman from her homeland who had approached her 6 months earlier. He claimed to represent a group of wealthy merchants and minor nobles who were dissatisfied with King Alexander's trade policies and military alliances. Initially, Volkov had simply asked Isabella to influence her husband's decisions, to encourage him toward policies that would benefit their mutual homeland. The request seemed harmless enough, and Isabella felt loyalty to the country of her birth. But gradually, Volkov's demands became more serious, more dangerous. The queen explained how Volkov had shown her photographs of her elderly parents and younger sister, all living peacefully in her homeland. The message was clear without being spoken directly. If she didn't cooperate with their plans, her family would suffer the consequences. The threats escalated when King Alexander refused to change his policies despite her subtle influences. Marcus listened carefully as Isabella described secret meetings held in the palace gardens late at night. Volkov had provided her with detailed plans, backup strategies, and the poison itself. He had assured her that the king's death would look natural, like a heart attack, and that she would be protected as the grieving widow who would influence the young prince's regency. King Alexander's face grew darker with each revelation. He realized that his kingdom had been infiltrated by a sophisticated network of foreign agents who had been planning this operation for months, possibly years. His wife wasn't just a betrayer. She was a victim of manipulation and coercion who had been placed in an impossible position. The queen continued her confession, revealing that tonight was supposed to be the final phase of the operation. After the king's death, Volkov and his associates planned to eliminate other key supporters of the current government, including several loyal ministers and military commanders. Marcus himself was on their list, which explained why Isabella had seemed so nervous about his presence. As Isabella spoke, Marcus began to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. This wasn't just about killing the king, it was about completely restructuring the government to benefit foreign interests. The conspirators had planned everything down to the smallest details, including how they would manipulate the grieving kingdom into accepting their new leadership. King Alexander stood up and walked to his desk, his mind already working on how to respond to this threat. He asked Isabella for the names of everyone involved, every detail about their plans, and every piece of information she could remember about their organization. His voice was no longer that of a betrayed husband, but of a king defending his realm. Isabella provided everything she knew, including the locations of safe houses, code words used by the conspirators, and the timing of their planned operations. She revealed that Volkov was staying in a mansion outside the city, believing himself to be safe while his plan unfolded in the palace. Marcus realized that they now had a crucial advantage. The conspirators believed their plot was proceeding as planned. They expected King Alexander to be dead within hours, and they would be unprepared for the coordinated response that was about to strike them. But time was critical. Every moment they delayed gave the enemies more opportunity to escape or implement backup plans. The king turned to Marcus with determination in his eyes. He gave orders to quietly mobilize trusted guards, secure the palace, and prepare for immediate action against the conspiracy. They would use Isabella's information to strike first before Volkov and his associates realized their plot had been discovered. As plans began to form, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. His quick action had saved the king's life, but now they faced an even greater challenge. They had to dismantle an entire network of conspirators while keeping the kingdom stable and preventing panic among the people. The real battle was just beginning. Within 2 hours, Marcus had assembled a team of the kingdom's most trusted guards and intelligence operatives. Using Isabella's detailed information, they developed a coordinated plan to strike multiple locations simultaneously before the conspirators could react or escape. The operation would require perfect timing and absolute secrecy. King Alexander made the difficult decision to keep Isabella under protective custody rather than throwing her immediately into the dungeons. Her cooperation was essential for the success of their mission, and her information continued to prove valuable as they planned their response. She would face justice, but only after they had dealt with the immediate threat to the kingdom. The first target was Lord Volkov's mansion, a sprawling estate that served as the headquarters for the conspiracy. Marcus led a team of 12 elite guards, approaching the property through the surrounding forest to avoid detection. They had studied the layout Isabella provided and knew exactly where to find their primary targets. As they moved through the darkness, Marcus reflected on how quickly everything had changed. That morning, he had been a simple palace guard conducting routine duties. Now he was leading a mission that would determine the fate of the entire kingdom. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but his years of training and absolute loyalty to King Alexander kept him focused. The mansion appeared peaceful from the outside, with only a few lights visible in the windows. But Isabella had warned them that appearances were deceiving. The building was heavily guarded by trained mercenaries, and the conspirators inside were armed and dangerous. They would not surrender easily when they realized their plot had been discovered. Marcus divided his team into 3 groups, each approaching the mansion from a different direction. The plan was to surround the building completely before announcing their presence, preventing anyone from escaping to warn other members of the conspiracy. Communication between the groups was maintained through a system of silent signals they had practiced during their years of service together. At exactly midnight, Marcus gave the signal for the coordinated assault to begin. His team moved swiftly and silently, overwhelming the exterior guards before they could raise an alarm. The element of surprise was crucial to their success, and so far everything was proceeding according to plan. Inside the mansion, they found exactly what Isabella had described. Maps of the kingdom marked with strategic locations, lists of government officials targeted for elimination, and correspondence with foreign agents confirming the scope of the conspiracy. But most importantly, they found Lord Volkov himself, along with several key conspirators who were planning their next moves. The confrontation was brief but intense. Volkov and his associates were clearly skilled fighters, but they were unprepared for the sudden attack and outnumbered by Marcus's well-trained guards. Within minutes, the primary conspirators were captured, their weapons confiscated, and their plans disrupted. Meanwhile, simultaneous raids were taking place across the kingdom at safe houses and meeting locations Isabella had identified. The coordinated operation was proving successful, with dozens of conspirators being arrested and critical evidence being seized. The network that had taken months to establish was being dismantled in a single night. As dawn broke, Marcus stood in the mansion's main hall, surrounded by captured conspirators and seized evidence. The immediate threat to King Alexander had been neutralized, but he knew this was likely just one cell of a larger international conspiracy. The investigation would continue for weeks or months as they traced connections to other kingdoms and identified additional threats. Volkov, now in chains, maintained his arrogant demeanor even in defeat. He told Marcus that killing him would solve nothing, that there were others ready to take his place, and that the forces seeking to change the kingdom would not be stopped by one night's work. His words were troubling, but they also confirmed that the conspiracy was indeed part of something much larger than they had initially realized. 3 weeks after the dramatic events in the king's study, the full scope of the conspiracy had been revealed through intensive investigation and interrogation. The plot extended far beyond what anyone had initially imagined, involving agents from 3 different kingdoms and corruption reaching into the highest levels of government and military. Marcus found himself promoted to the newly created position of Director of Royal Security, responsible for preventing future infiltration and protecting the kingdom from both internal and external threats. His quick thinking and unwavering loyalty had not only saved King Alexander's life but had also uncovered a threat that could have destroyed the entire royal line. Queen Isabella faced a royal tribunal that would determine her fate. The evidence of her guilt was undeniable, but the circumstances of her coercion and her cooperation in dismantling the conspiracy were taken into consideration. King Alexander struggled with the personal pain of her betrayal while trying to balance justice with mercy for the mother of his children. The tribunal's decision reflected the complexity of Isabella's situation. She was stripped of her royal titles and sentenced to exile rather than execution, with the understanding that she would live under constant supervision in a remote monastery. Her children would remain in the kingdom under the care of trusted relatives, protected from the shame of their mother's actions. King Alexander emerged from the crisis as a stronger and more vigilant ruler. The experience had taught him valuable lessons about trust, security, and the constant threats facing any kingdom. He implemented new protocols for palace security and established a network of intelligence operatives to monitor potential threats before they could develop into serious dangers. The captured conspirators faced various punishments depending on their level of involvement and cooperation with the investigation. Volkov and the primary organizers were executed for treason, while lesser participants faced imprisonment or exile. The evidence gathered from their operations helped other kingdoms identify and eliminate similar threats within their own borders. Marcus often reflected on that October morning when his instincts had told him something was wrong. He realized how easily the conspiracy could have succeeded if he had ignored those warnings or hesitated to act. A single moment of doubt could have changed the course of history, plunging the kingdom into chaos and foreign control. The relationship between Marcus and King Alexander had evolved from one of simple loyalty to deep mutual respect and friendship. The king valued Marcus not just as a protector, but as an advisor whose judgment had proven invaluable during the crisis. Their shared experience had created a bond that would last for the remainder of their lives. As months passed, life in the kingdom returned to a new normal. The people never learned the full details of how close they had come to losing their king and their independence. They only knew that their ruler had emerged stronger and more determined to protect their way of life from those who would seek to destroy it. Marcus continued his duties with the knowledge that his vigilance had prevented a catastrophe. He had witnessed firsthand how quickly trust could be betrayed, and how essential it was to remain alert to threats that could come from anywhere, even from those closest to power. The peaceful morning that had nearly ended in tragedy had taught him that a guard's duty was never truly finished. The truth of what had happened in the king's study that morning remained known only to a few trusted individuals, but for Marcus, it served as a constant reminder that sometimes the most important moments in history happen not on battlefields or in throne rooms, but in the quiet spaces where loyalty and duty are tested against impossible odds. His choice to act had saved not just a king but an entire kingdom's future.